Please help me in welcoming Yau-Man.
Thank you for having me. All right, it's not going to be a very long talk. I'm hoping to just do some rant and brain dump with my fellow atheists, and hopefully, you can help me figure out how we go from here. Like Jason mentioned, I have been formally involved in the skeptical movement for quite a while. I just took my atheism for granted after I leave mission school. I spent 12 years in a mission school, thoroughly brainwashed by the Christian missionaries, and I got out of that with my brain intact. Some of my friends didn't. I mean, I go to high school reunions, and they are all into it. But I have not been very active in the atheist movement. I was been spending a lot of time with the skeptical movement, mainly because of where I come from. Right, I am from a very ancient culture, the Chinese, and talk about boatloads of nonsense. Okay, we got it, and people really think it's real. Things like feng shui, and all the way from feng shui to acupuncture to strange herbal medicine. And when I look into it and go, wow, they're great scientists and so on. Why won't we figure out what is real and not real? It's so easy to figure out. And so, but I had always assumed that skeptics would be naturally atheists, until I formally joined up with the atheist movement. So one of the first thing is the James Randi Education Foundation, and I went to a couple of amazing meetings and met some Christians there. Oh, shut up! Don't say anything bad about religion. Okay. And it took me a while for that to sink in and say, yeah, it's different. Okay. And so I'm still wondering why. And then recently I retired from UC Berkeley after 30 years of, and I survived with my brains intact. Okay, 30 years at UC Berkeley. So I rather than sit at home, I got a part-time job in Marin County. Okay, it's sort of the home of pseudoscience. Right. So I'm working in San Rafael. I used to work in San Anselmo, but the store moved to San Rafael. So I work for a camera store. If you are into old cameras, come to the store. A Seawood Photo in San Rafael is a privately owned camera store. It's been around since 1947. We restore old cameras. I mean, you want to buy a Hasselblad? I've got them. Linhoffs and so on. And there I met a population of people who are not religious at all. Okay, and all the customers and so on. But yet there are all kinds of pseudoscience. I thought it was an urban legend, but I actually witnessed it at their Whole Foods store there. There are customers at their Whole Foods store who refuse to allow their food items to be scanned by the laser barcode reader. No, this is real. I'm telling you, I mean, I thought it was a joke. I really, for the longest time, I thought, it's one of the urban legends, okay? You have to witness it there. And I asked the clerk, I go, is that for, she said, yeah, quite a number of people asked to be hand-entered. Really? Right? And these people, we talk to them, they poo-poo religion and all that. So I want to share with you, right? So since you're all atheists, you know what atheism is about. So I want to share with you, first of all, what is a skeptic? What's skepticism? The best definition for skepticism, which we would identify that as with the scientific skepticism, okay? There are a bunch of people like the 9/11 truthers who call themselves skeptics, and I want to kill them, okay? They're not skeptics, all right? So let's get that clear. So Steve Novella, Dr. Steve Novella of the SGU, right, Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, he had one of the best definitions. A skeptic is one who prefers beliefs and conclusions that are reliable and valid to ones that are comforting or convenient. and therefore is rigorously and openly applied the methods of science and reason to all empirical claims, especially their own. Basically, you look at things, regardless of what you're feeling about it, you look at it and analyze it and apply the scientific method. The next definition, there's 3 phrases to this. A skeptic provisionally proportions acceptance of any claims to valid logic and a fair and thorough assessment of available evidence and studies the pitfalls of human reasoning and the mechanism of deception so as to avoid being deceived by others or themselves. This is important, right? That we, and I think it was Richard Feynman, the physicist, who keep harping on the fact that you yourself is the easiest person to deceive, that you can deceive yourself. You have to have some checks and balance, right? You have to look at it from another point of view. You have to find the scientific evidence for it. And finally, skepticism values methods over any particular conclusion. So instead of drawing the conclusion, you want to apply the scientific method first when you evaluate anything. Now, what is problematic for me in looking at something like that is that among the educated populace, that's an easy thing to sell, right? But not everybody, is going to do that deep thinking, to do that deep dive. Do you have to be a trained scientist to be a skeptic? I hope not, right? And I'm hoping that if you guys think about it, how do we get that message across? When people read formal statements like that, I'm not a trained scientist, I don't think like this. I'm trying to talk to some of the, I was quite active when my kids was in primary school. I was quite active with the science teachers there and trying to get them to, train the kids to think, right? Don't just give them formulas. Ask questions, teach them to ask questions. But the people who are atheists, who are not skeptics, right? We have to ask them, how did you become an atheist, right? I don't know. People come from different experience. Some of them, sort of grew up as atheists. They never asked the question. Just like there are people who grew up as Muslim, they never asked the question, is this the religion for me? No, they're just that, right? And I'm afraid that my 2 daughters are almost that way because they grew up without religion and they take atheism for granted, that that's the natural state of things. And so I have to keep prompting them, if your friends ask you to go to church, sure, go with them, right? Then when you come back, ask me questions about it or ask them questions about it. Don't take for granted that just because, I sort of casually sometimes, I know I'm a bad dad. I badmouth religion all the time around, so they take it for. I hope they don't just take that, right, as the status quo. They need to ask questions. We have atheists who, and I have met them too, who believe in all kinds of stuff that is just mind-boggling. Not just pseudoscience stuff. They believe in all the Illuminatis and, you name it, they got it, right? And when I start to pursue them, I ask them, well, how did you get to that conclusion, right? And you find that it's the same sort of, so-and-so told me, I don't like this, and therefore it must be controlled by some Jewish conspiracy. That was a big thing, right? Or, I don't like this because it must be controlled by this. The Monsanto thing, it's an evil company, therefore everything they do must be evil. And anything I don't like about agriculture, about chemistry, it's Monsanto's fault, right? And you find a lot of those people. Now, a lot of them are also religious people, but they're also people who don't believe in anything. But they believe Monsanto is evil just because. And I find them in Marin County, of all places, right? A Wi-Fi sensitivity. Turn off Wi-Fi. You got a cordless phone at home, same frequency, sorry, right? But they never look at that, okay? How do we educate them? Again, I don't have an answer. I'm going to share with you my frustration with this, okay? As keep harping, for the longest time, I thought they should overlap. But they don't. They really don't. There are so many issues that we as, sort of non-believers can come to a conclusion about religion. What is and is not true. How do we know that? But what about the other stuff? Can we show them how to think through it? Some of us have thought through our religious upbringing and have thought our way out of it, okay? Like I said, I went through 12 years of school, mission school. I was an altar boy and all that, right? One of the few unflocked altar boys out there. So how did I get out of it? I have to keep thinking to myself, where did that sort of change of mind comes in, right? At one point, I was going to a seminary. Eventually, I had to find out. I started reading history, I started reading books, and eventually I read myself out of it, okay? Does everybody have to do that? I don't know. How can I persuade this person who thinks that scanning your vegetable with a barcode reader is going to somehow damage it, or will cause some kind of brain damage if you eat the vegetable, right? The answer is you cannot, right? You just say, oh, that's stupid, but that's not the way to approach it, right? There is a huge population of people like that, unfortunately, right? And my real frustration is, we need to work together to work on both sides, right? Yeah, we got the religious have an influence on the government, which is very, very bad, and we're seeing it now in the election. But so is the adherence to pseudoscience, adherence to all kinds of nonsense. If you look at some of the government policies, right, things like teaching of evolution and so on, right, that is part of the skeptics movement. It's also part of religion. Okay, the whole debate about solar power, nuclear power, that is also part of that skepticism, right? What is real, what is not? How do we get the evidence? How do we get evidence that can be evaluated and not just somebody's feeling, oh, I really hate this nuclear thing, don't want it, right? If there's a ballot measure, you vote no just because you're afraid of it without understanding it, right? Or the other side of things, have all the tax on. There are some states that are putting huge tax on solar power, right? And people are talking about, how the solar rays, you're going to use up all the solar rays. Or there are people who are talking about all the, what do you call the windmill disease? I mean, you live near a windmill farm, you get some kind, right? Are there a way to evaluate it? It doesn't matter at this time whether we have ways or not. It just people don't want to listen, right? Just as they were in the religion, I have a friend who is trying to get out of the Mormon church, right? He cannot just leave because his family is in it, and he cannot talk about it, right? And so while he himself has done his research and say this is total bull, but he has to stay in it, right? And so it's like, does your wife know? Well, she doesn't want to listen. Same as in our case of skepticism. There are many things that are so much wrong with people who believe in pseudoscience and pseudo-physics and pseudo-chemistry. How do we get that message across? Again, I don't have the answer, so I will let you figure it out. So let's see the big three, okay, where they should overlap, right? The first thing is superstition, right? So I think most atheists are not superstitious. There may be a few exceptions. Superstition, I would consider as part of religion, right? It's whether you call it superstition, religion, whether they have a building or not, right? It's my definition, right? If they have a nice building, that's religion. If they don't, it's a superstition. I have many, like I said, I come from a very ancient culture. I mean, we have boatloads of superstition, right? It will just, blow your mind if we go through some of the superstition. So, especially one of the most awful superstition involve babies and childbirth, okay? Oh, there's some Chinese here, right? If you talk to your grandmother and so on, right? Babies and childbirth, all kinds of superstition about what they can and cannot eat, what you can and cannot do to them before they're 1 month old and all that, right? And today, there are still people who totally believe that. It is not a bygone era. My cousin's, last year when I visited her, she was about to have the first baby boy of the family, right? and the parents spend over 100,000 US dollars, okay, to prepare that room with all the proper accoutrements and buying the correct food for the mother so that the baby will live, right? You can't say no to this because if there's anything wrong with the baby, they blame it on you. So you leave them alone, okay? And go, oh, and he has an MBA from Harvard, right? I mean, the mother have MBA, the father have an MBA from Harvard. The mother was a chemist, right? But yet they have to do this for their parents. What can you do, okay? That kind of superstition, and I see that. In fact, in one of the Bay Area skeptics, we're going to have Skeptical in May this year, right? So I hope to see some of you there. He works for Intel. So anybody know Raymond Lee? He's from Sacramento, and he just got married to a girl from Myanmar, Burma, okay? And the family is so superstitious. You can't do this, you can't do this, you cannot say this, you cannot say that. Right? And they just had a baby, and he went through the same thing. And he's like 30 years old, and he grew up mostly in the US and Hong Kong, and so he doesn't know a lot of the superstitions. So I'm the grand old father, it's like he's asking me, why can I say this? When the baby, when the grandmother visit, what am I supposed to dress the baby as? I mean, there's a whole suite of things you can and cannot do. And that is because in the days of old, babies don't survive very much, okay? Before Western medicine came to China, okay, very few babies live past the first year. And that was very common. My grandmother gave birth 7 times, according to my mother, and she and her younger brother were the only 2 surviving, all right? And that's how dangerous it was. Right? And they were fed stuff that when she tell me what they were fed because of superstition, it was scary, right? They were fed sugar water. That's supposed to be good for you, okay? They were not allowed to eat green vegetable because it gives you tummy ache, okay? That's because they didn't clean the vegetable probably, or because the vegetable had manure on it, right? And they were getting sick. And they blamed this sickness on superstition, all kinds of it. And because of the lack of evidence-based medicine, people died. And the superstition builds up more and more, right? And the way my mom was herself was very superstitious. She was a good Catholic girl and so on. And when she came to live in the US, she became a Buddhist. So she became a vegetarian. So that's strange mom, right? She come to the US, becomes Buddhist. But she became less and less superstitious when she lived in the US. And that is because when she started to see other cultures that don't have the same superstition she has. So for example, one of the things that she's really, really concerned about is Chinese New Year, right? Chinese New Year, people who are Chinese know about Chinese New Year superstition. You're supposed to say all good things. You're not supposed to say any word that rhymes with death, which is very difficult. All right? And you're not supposed to sweep the floor, right? Because you're sweeping the prosperity away. You cannot wash your hair because you're washing away prosperity. And how come prosperity stay with your hair? I don't know. But so my mom, sort of after a few years in the US, just stopped that. And I saw her sweeping the floor one New Year's Day. And I go, Mom, what happened? She goes, it's just superstition, right? Hey, good for you, Mom. She goes, look, there are a lot of people like Bill Gates and maybe Mark Zuckerberg and so on who don't know about this superstition. They're billionaires. I'm sure at some point they swept the floor and they didn't even know this New Year's Day, right? I didn't want to tell her Bill Gates probably never swept his own floor, but anyway, that's the way it was, right? Being a Chinese, because it's a monosyllabic language, homophones are so common that it's tough to avoid words that don't sound like each other, right? So the number 4 sounds like death. So you don't say anything with 4, right? In Hong Kong, in the buildings, there's no 14th floor, okay, because it sounds like certain death, okay? And we don't have 13th floor, but they don't have 14th floor. So it's one of these things where when people become more educated, it doesn't have to be formal education. It can be just opening the eyes and looking around them and say, wow, that is not true, is it, what I believe, right? There's a superstition in Korea that it's called the electric fan death, right? Ask any Koreans who are from Korea. They were told to not sleep with the fan on at night because it will kill them, okay? Go Google electric fan death, okay? And so when I first heard about it, I'm from Malaysia. I grew up in Malaysia. If you don't leave the fan on when you sleep, you'll be waking up in a pool of sweat, okay? It's 90 degrees all night and 90% humidity, right? And I told my Korean friend, I said, you sure about that? Then I should be dead now, right? And he said, yeah, this Korea is different. But anyway, there are Korean doctors who try to make a case why it could be true. Not kidding, okay? This is how these things are. So I think one of the things that helps, from those people who don't believe, they're usually from who still hold on to superstition, even though they're not religious. Okay, they may not believe, they may not belong to a formal religion, but because of the culture, hangs on to certain superstition. I'm a lot more forgiving of that because I've seen that. I've seen it with my mom, and hopefully, with exposure to other cultures, they may get out of that eventually. All right. The other thing that I think should somehow overlap also is alternative medicine, right? I know it's a cliche, but there's no such thing as alternative medicine. If it works, it's called medicine, all right? It's alternative medicine because it's not tested or it has been tested to not work and people are still using it and say it's alternative medicine. This is something that I find a lot in the non-believing community up in Marin County. I keep picking on them because I run into them all the time, right? Who believe all kinds of things, right? I know this big pharma thing. I know Monsanto thing. I mean, we understand those things, right? That there is a huge huge suspicion about big corporations and so on. I'm from UC Berkeley. We know about these bad corporations, but let's not go overboard with this, right? There are certain data that you can get, right? Today with Google, today with PubMed, you can actually get those things. There's still a lot of research paper that is behind a paywall, but go to any public library, you can get behind a paywall without paying, all right? A lot of these things people are hanging on to because they're not skeptical enough to look into that, okay? At work, a couple of my fellow co-workers there, they are as atheistic as you can get. But boy, do they subscribe to all kinds of medical nonsense, right? One of the things, the nutrition thing about consuming chlorophyll, right? It's supposed to be good for you. When you're tired, it'll build your immune system. They have chlorophyll pills, right? And say, oh, it's good for the plants. Of course it's good for me. And they recite all the things good about chlorophyll. And I said, yeah, but think about this. The chlorophyll, you know how chlorophyll works, right? It needs the sunlight to trigger the chemical reaction. Without sunlight, chlorophyll doesn't do much, right? Oh, where you're going to put this pill, sunshine would probably not shine. So take all you want. I mean, just simple thinking through this, right? It doesn't require a science degree. All you have to do is keep awake in your middle school years. Unfortunately, people don't, right? And so we see a lot of people who, again, stop believing in a formal religion. They start believing all kinds of stuff, right? The Wi-Fi sensitivity. How many tests do we have to do to show that there is no such thing? Or if there is, it's not shown in any test, but yet there are people who... There are schools in Oregon where they have banned Wi-Fi in the school because some parents said that it somehow affects the kid's brain, right? This is sad. This is very sad. I mean, we are going to be missing out on a lot of things if the kids don't get to get on the internet for the proper things. Yeah, I know they get all kind of nonsense off the internet, but it is one of the necessary things. I told you about the laser scanning thing. It's like, I wish I could talk to this person who refused to let her food be scanned by laser. I'm going to just put a flashlight and shine it on her food and say, here it is. Here's contaminated food. Are you going to keep it off sunlight? So this is things that those of you who are skeptics, can help. You don't again, need formal education. You just have to think through these things and say, how real are they? Can you find data about, today with Google, with search engines, you can find these things, all right? Now, be aware that there are a lot of nonsense you can find also, but you can filter them. It's really, some of the more authoritative sources from research universities and so on are very, very good sources that you can actually find. And then finally, the granddaddy of them all, skepticism, goes up against conspiracy theories. I mean, there's so many. Now, first of all, there are some conspiracy that's true, all right? The Watergate, right? That was a conspiracy. It was true, right? Let's not dismiss all conspiracy here, right? There are actual conspiracy that actually happens. Everybody know about the Watergate conspiracy. A bunch of people trying to break in, Democratic headquarters. A few years ago, and there are conspiracy involving big corporations that turn out to be true, right? The cigarette thing, where they deny that it's harmful, and they have scientists that they pay off to say, there's no harm, right? We found out those conspiracies. That was it, right? My favorite one is from the 1980s. Anybody remember the Gerber baby food, 100% apple juice? Beech Nut, right? What's the holding company? They own Gerber, and they were selling these apple juice that is 100% apple juice, right? And they were selling it, good for babies and so on. And it turned out that it was not 100% apple juice, right? Surprise, surprise. In fact, 2 executives, if I remember right, ended up being fined. They almost went to jail for that, right? That was a conspiracy, right? To try and sell a product to the general public, right? And the government made a case against the whole conspiracy, how they sold this. It turned out to have beet sugar and all kinds of sugar, but definitely not even close to 100% apple juice, right? The way it was discovered was, I think, some apple broker who sells them the raw juice. When he read the annual report from Gerber about how much money they made with how many gallons, millions of gallons they produce, and he said, wait a minute, they're supposed to buy all the apples from us. He must be buying from other people because the amount they buy from me cannot make that many millions of gallons, right? So eventually the statistics caught up with them, and they got busted. That's a conspiracy. We know these things, and usually conspiracies get busted. And so my favorite of conspiracy theories is the chemtrail, right? Now, you may laugh, but I have actually talked to people. Again, it's one of those things where I thought, it's a joke, right? It's just a joke. But so one of the things about being on a Survivor is I get to travel this country, okay? So I end up in parts of the country that I would have never ended up in, right? Middle of Kentucky, right? Where first time in my life after Survivor, I went to a Survivor, one of these fundraiser get-together, and I met people in the room, most of them in that same room, who actually believe that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old. Again, one of the things I thought is a joke, right? But no, I met people like that. And so in my travels, I actually met people who believe chemtrails, right? That when you see jet planes flying, that little trail steam thing are actually chemicals, right? And so here is, ever since that, I've been thinking about how to talk to these people, okay? Like, if they believe that the jet planes, all these jet planes flying around, every time you see this little, look, there's the chemtrail, they're spraying the population, making them dumb, right? So the government can control them. Now, and it's working, that's the worst part of it. Because they're voting for who, right? It just, how? So first of all, here's how I came up with the idea whenever I talk to them. I said, look, so there must be some world government because you see them not over the US, you see them all over the world, right? So it's not just the US, it's the whole world. Somebody's controlling this. Secondly, So these planes flying out there, who loaded up these chemicals, right? They're flying 30,000 feet and spraying this chemical. Have you seen crop dusters, how close they fly to the ground in order to dust them? And look into the literature, look how many of these people, crop dusters, end up with all kinds of diseases before they make them now wear bunny suits and hazmat suits to put this chemical. They used to just dump these chemicals on and then spray it, right? Now they're much more cautious about it. So who do you think load this highly potent chemical into the plane, right? The ground crews, right? The pilot who have to spray this? Seriously? And nobody talked, right? So you have to have conspiracy involving all these people, right? And the chances are that somebody at some point is going to have some financial difficulty who may want to sell the story. I mean, to keep this conspiracy together for something so huge, right, that involves every pilot, licensed pilot that flies 747 to be involved. I mean, what are the chances? Same thing as the moon landing hoax, right? It's a whole hoax. It's all done in a studio. In the heydays of NASA, they hire over 500,000 people and all the subcontractors. I mean, everybody had to be in it, and 50 years later, nobody's saying anything. Is it possible, right? I mean, the chances that happened is so slim that you know somebody's making it up, okay? The conspiracy theory is, I met more atheists who are into conspiracy theories than I care to count, right? And you go, okay, you don't believe that, you know, Jesus died and was raised up, or that you chew a wafer and you poop Jesus' DNA, right? But yet, you think somebody sprayed something over there, right? And whoever loaded up that plane is working for who? And that person didn't get sick, and that every ground crew knows about it in every airport. I mean, this is unbelievable. But yet, they choose to believe that because they were sold on this whole thing that there is some big government conspiracy to make you and I stupid, right? And yes, it's working. So those are the sort of big three. There are a lot more other things, but a lot of these things a lot of the other pseudoscience things can always be put under conspiracy theories, right? The anti-vaccination bunch, right? It's a conspiracy, a big pharma conspiracy, you know, to make your children dull or to give them autism. The food, you know, Monsanto is a whole conspiracy. Every time they cannot figure out why some things happen, if they get a pseudoscience explanation, then you say, okay, then who's behind it? Well, it's a big conspiracy, okay? That you guys can help me think up a way to explain this to next time you encounter one of your friends with this conspiracy theories, okay? Without going deeply into science. I mean, like I said, with the chemtrail thing, I just asked him to think about, you know, who is involved? How did some agency, you know, distribute these things and nobody talked and have so many people throughout the world involved? Is it possible that it's going on and nobody is saying boo? Right? Those things can be questioned without invoking a lot of sciences, right? If you think about the chemtrail, right? If you really think how effective it has to be after it's diluted from 30,000, you have to believe in, what's that, homeopathy, right? Where things get more diluted, it gets even more effective, right? So those things, we as a community, right, have to start confronting them. I know your emphasis here is atheism. Atheism, you confront people who tell you about religious experience that are, you know, you think is total nonsense. But then you need to start thinking, those of you who want to get more involved in the skepticism movement, you're welcome. I don't know how people who become skeptics can still be religious. I never really got to talk to a couple of the Christians I met at the James Randi amazing meeting. I'm hoping I will. So James Randi Education Foundation will no longer be holding the amazing meeting, but they knew the SciCoop have taken, or Center for Scientific Inquiry has, Skeptical Inquiry have taken over and will have the conference. And I really hope I get a chance to talk to some of these believers who are in the skeptical movement, but yet set aside the skepticism and believe and still can be a Christian, right? Yeah, they're mostly liberal Christians. They're not, they're not the fundamentalists. They're not the Mormons, right, or the Jehovah's Witness, but they certainly do have set aside the skepticism, right? And I don't know how literal the Bible they believe in, but certainly they believe enough to, consider the salvation and the whole bit that goes along with being a Christian. So anyway, I made it in time. Open to questions.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really fabulous. And Korea is not the only place that has a superstition about wind or air.
Yeah. Oh.
My sister lives in Germany. She married a German guy about 10 years ago, right here on the top of Mount Diablo. And apparently it's very common in Germany to believe that anything that creates a wind will make you sick. And my brother-in-law explains it as it's forcing more germs to flow past you. This is his explanation.
That's why you close all your windows when you sleep. Okay.
So yeah,
Yes.
there's a lot more. Any questions?
I can officially confirm I am Korean, and my dad used to say that to me.
Say it again.
My father did say that to me when I was younger. I'm Korean, and he's an atheist. So.
And does he still believe the fan will kill you?
Oh yeah, he does. But I slept with the fan on anyway.
Yeah.
When I got old enough, and nothing ever happened. But he did say that to me. And when you said that, it just whoosh brought back a memory. I was like, did he say that to me? He did.
Yeah. No, I found out about that only when I was in college, and I ran into a Korean graduate student. I was an undergraduate at MIT, and a Korean graduate student told me about that, right? And at that time, I don't remember whether he himself believed it or not, but I was so shocked, right? And I said, well, I grew up in Borneo. I had to leave my fan on every night, right? It was like, otherwise, there's no way I'm going to wake up tomorrow. Yeah, it's strange, right? And if you go Google Korean fan death, right, you will see the Korean government, actually some of their medical personnel is trying to explain, to rationalize why people believe that and how it could actually happen. There. There was a question in the back there.
Hey, you said that you needed help trying to answer your first two original questions, and after I saw that, I started taking notes on my phone, so I hope you'll forgive me for reading off of
Oh,
that.
okay.
Okay. Jamie in Swiss, you probably know him from the
Yes.
JREF, yeah. He said that properly applied skepticism necessarily leads to atheism, but we have intelligent people with advanced degrees who are not, obviously. And the answer to your first question, why are there religious skeptics, is probably because of cognitive dissonance, the ability we have to hold contrary ideas at the same time. William Dembski, you might know him from the Intelligent Design
Yes.
Institute in Seattle. Yeah. He has a master's degree in biology, but writes teacher curriculum and state build templates for Christian creationism. My own solution would be to continue to educate the general public and advocate for critical thinking, which of course is is what the JREF was founded to do. But we had that recent research show that the smarter a person gets, the better they are at defending their wrong beliefs, and that people double down on their wrong beliefs when presented with contrary evidence. For your second question, why are many atheists not more skeptical? You already answered that early in your talk when you said that many people hold wrong beliefs due to an emotional appeal. Right. Introspection is hard, and admitting that you may be wrong is a learned trait. My girlfriend indulges in the naturalistic fallacy when she prefers organic foods, despite knowing logically that there is no chemical difference between organic and traditional produce, because she heard that organic is safer and the thought of mortality frightens her. And once again, it's an emotional kind of thing. For people like her, I think No Illusions of the Scathing Atheist podcast and Matt Dillahunty of the Atheist Experience TV show are right. Be patient and continue to push against superstition, because you never know what bit will be the trigger that allows her to question her beliefs. And then lastly, here's the largest problem that I see. I recognized every example of pseudoscience that you talked about tonight, but that took about 500 episodes of the SGU, thousands of blog posts, and hours of reading Richard Wiseman to get to this point. Steve Novella said that to hold a wrong belief, you don't have to know anything, but to debunk it, you have to know a little about everything. And that's just not a priority for most people. So it's easy for bad beliefs to propagate.
Yeah, it's here's my thought about that, all right? If you I think the difference is if someone have been a religious person and converted to atheism, at some point curiosity, intellectual curiosity must have kicked in. Otherwise, it's like my friend who's a Mormon, who's a fourth generation Mormon, at some point, he has a PhD in chemistry, okay? At some point, intellectual curiosity about his religion kicked in, that he started to do research on it, right? And I think that, I don't know what can trigger such a curiosity for the other atheists who hold wrong belief, who hold strange belief about conspiracies and so on, right? So yeah, something have to trigger, something have to happen for them to start thinking about it in a more deeper fashion, or to challenge their sort of long-held cultural beliefs. A lot of people do not want to challenge that. It's when my mom passed away a year ago, 2 years ago now, of lung cancer, after, having discovered she had third stage lung cancer and lived another 7 years, right? And her friends, her Chinese friends from Hong Kong and relatives sent her all kinds of concoctions, right? That's supposed to guarantee to cure cancer. Some of them cost a lot of money. Right? And my mom would say, oh, send your uncle $1,000. I said, what? He said, yeah, he sent me this mushroom thing, that's going to cure cancer. And so, just to be curious, I would look up those mushroom things that, were sent to her. And you look up the description in, let's see, which one? A couple of universities have very good data on all these herbal medicines and what the active ingredients are. But anyway, many of them are quite harmless. They didn't do anything. I don't think it, caused her prematurely to die, but, and you can see how people get taken with this just because, their relatives, it's part of the culture. The best one is one of these strange mushroom, lychee mushroom or something like that, Lingzi, right? According to their own website, it promotes blood vessel growth. And I don't know what drugs will promote blood vessel growth, but if you have a tumor, that's the last thing you want, okay? It's like they even miss the most fundamental things about anatomy, about cancer, and yet they are trying to sell these things. So someone who's intellectually curious would want to find out about these things and say, wait, everything I got is wrong, right? And my mom got to that stage where she's trying to tell her brother, please don't send me any of these things, but you can't stop him, right? And then my mom felt like it's obligated to, reimburse him and say, yeah, man, send your uncle this money. And I go, no! Anyway, yeah.
Hi. Also going to make an attempt at answering one of the other questions you brought up, which is how can we get people to reconsider the conspiracy theories that they might hold dear? And speaking from personal experience here, I certainly used to overestimate the amount of damage that a large organization of people could potentially inflict if they so chose to do. And something that's helped me there is working in the corporate world and seeing how maybe larger organizations mirror a situation that you might see in Dilbert more than the situation they might see in a very damaging conspiracy. Because it's impressively difficult to socially engineer a consensus to work towards such a single-minded and damaging goal.
Bunch of questions here. Maybe two more here, and I'll go to the other side.
I know this is typically for questions, but viewing superstition and religion down the same vein, they're both attempts at controlling the world around you. One of the most superstitious sports is baseball because it's very hard to do it well. So they have lucky socks. And I think we all, at least I know I occasionally have little superstitions. Something happened, so I want to wear those socks again or something. So they're both attempts to control the world around you. You can pray to God, you can wear your lucky socks. So viewing it from that perspective helps to understand why people do it. I think the first step in understanding how to change people is to understand why they do it in the first place. So I find that to be a very useful way of looking at it.
Thank you, yeah. That takes some empathy on our part too, yeah. And I find myself being lot less empathetic right now. Especially, they said that the new converts are the worst, right? In that, I've gone through that, and I find myself being impatient. I said, why are you still, believing these things? And yeah, I understand. Yeah, if I think about it and say, yeah, I went through that. I have to deal with that with my relatives and so on. Maybe I would be more gentle and say, okay, let it go, right? If it's not harmful, go for it.
Yeah, so I've been following on YouTube a bunch of people who, you may have seen this, flat earthers.
Oh.
But it goes much beyond that. I mean, they go to the point of talking about the moon is a luminary. So it's projected by some government. And it goes to the point someone else made about the governments all over the world would have to collude together to propagate this myth of a flat earth, that the moon is a luminary. And then you try to point out to them that so they have this model of a round, flat Earth, and the sun basically revolves around. And you try to point out that, okay, go to the desert, go to the ocean, and you see the sun dip below the horizon. Your model does not match that. You try to point out that the sun, if it was revolving around and not going below the horizon, it would never get completely dark. Shadows would grow longer, that it would get dimmer, but the sun would always be above, and so illuminating the earth. You try to explain these things and just get them to use reason, and they refuse to do it. And my only conclusion I come to, and it's sad, that you'll never convince them. There's something they're getting out of it. They're getting a reward. They're getting attention, even though it's a negative attention. They're getting recognition. They're setting themselves above everybody else, like, hey, I see this, but you don't, you can't. I'm smarter than you, I'm smarter than Einstein, I'm smarter than all the people who have ever, convinced, who have proof that the earth is a sphere. And so I think that's the reward they get. And so you're never going to be able to convince those people. They're just getting too much from it, even though they may know that they're not true, they're not accurate.
That is so sad, but yes, I think you're right there. Maybe there are subsets of people who are going to keep doing that. Sometimes you just have to write some of these people off. As long as you don't let them control the government or the school district, I guess I'm fine with them.
I think we need to acknowledge that superstition has been part of our culture for a long time. Women were inferior, black people were inferior, lesbians and gays wanted to be that way. Marijuana was a gateway drug to heroin. Sex work is another one. There are a lot of things that confront us today that are really based on superstition, not science. But these things do change over time. And I guess we need to study how they changed.
Yeah, I agree that some of this stuff takes much longer time, but so for example, things like, is marijuana a gateway drug, and is it of any medical value and so on? Those things can be scientifically proven, right? If we are willing to do the research, we're willing to accept the results of the research, they can be proven. There are subjects that are so taboo, right? Like sex work, right? And there's I'm sure sociologists have done research on it and say whether it's beneficial, whether a woman should have a right to sell her body for money and so on. And there are countries that have actually, done the social experiment, have legalized prostitution and other sex work. We may have to use that as our study and see what was the result of that, right? Those are not as clear-cut. There are things like homosexuality. Now, there are enough studies to show it's biological, right? Sexual attraction. It is not a choice. If you asked me 50 years ago, I don't know. But, it's really clear now. There is really no question anymore from the science of it. And yet, like you said, there are people who refuse to accept that, mostly because of religious reasons, right? And say, no, it's a choice, right? Or the worst argument they come out with, what if they find out that pedophilia is a biological trait? Are you going to legalize it, right? No, we're not talking about pedophilia. Not only that, we're not talking about harm to anybody, right? And so even in those cases where in the case of sexual identity, intersexuality, bisexuality, homosexuality, where it is shown over and over again that it is biological from every science angle. But there are people who would not accept it, they will refuse to accept that, and they will continue to want to make laws that outlaws them and so on. I mean, what do you do about that, right? You see a society changing very slowly, but it does change, and that's a good thing, right? And as more and more Western societies have led the way to that change, maybe other societies, will look on us and say, we're examples. See, they didn't go to hell in handbasket, although some Islamic country thinks we are. So.
Yeah, hi, great talk. I'm a skeptic, so I try to proportion my belief to the scientific evidence that exists. I try not to believe things that I don't have evidence for. There's one area that you sort of talked a little bit near but didn't really directly address, and I'd like to ask you a question on that, and that is genetically modified organisms that we eat. When I think back in history, radium water was sold for 35 years as a health substitute before we found out that it was lethal. And thalidomide was sold for 4 years before we found out the problems with that. So genetically modified organisms, we're taking and we're putting genes to produce proteins, and those proteins, we don't know, we don't have enough theory around how proteins work to tell us how those proteins are going to react. So I'm skeptical about GMOs, but there are people like Richard Dawkins and the other one, who put me in as sort of a conspiracy group, as being conspiratorial around GMOs. But I don't think the scientific evidence is there to support that they're safe. What do you think?
I think there is a lot more research done on GMO food than any other food in the last 15 years. Right? There are lots more. If you look at the literature, there are a lot more in that. If you look at the thalidomide and the radium stuff and so on, right? Those were the days when it's the same as the smoking things, right? Where doctors smoke. The science and the epidemiology was not mature enough to figure those things out. Those days, luckily, fortunately, are over. We know how to do those studies now very well. Okay, and in the case of GMO, looking at all the research, I'm convinced that it is safe. Now, having said that, right, you should continue to do the research, right? The thing about food is, it's about chemistry, right? When you eat anything, it doesn't matter what you eat. It goes into your stomach, it reacts to your stomach acid, okay? That chemical reaction is quite well known for a long time, right? And today we have instruments, we have tools to really, really look at it in minute detail, okay? And so, if you produce, however you produce a plant or a food substance, right? If I know what the chemical reaction is with my stomach juice, right? I'm good with that. If you can tell me the chemistry of it. If you don't know the chemistry of it, then I go, I don't know what it is, right? But that chemistry, if you can reproduce it in the lab, you can show me that it reacts the same way. It doesn't matter what it came from, how it came from. If it's the same food substance chemically that I'm ingesting and my stomach treats it the same way, it's going to produce the same result. And that's all I'm concerned with, right? And I think in the case of GMO, they really have done more than enough at this time, right? What worries me is that GMO crops, right? And here's where the concern is, that it does not encourage diversity of crops, right? Because if you can produce a GMO crop, right, they're so efficient that now we're exporting it to third world countries. Yes, we'll feed the hungry and so on and so forth. But now it will really limit the diversity of crop. And that may be a problem. I mean, that's an agricultural problem that people need to face, right, before it becomes a disaster. If you become so, single crop, not only single crop, but single strain of crop, right? That can become a problematic, can be quite problematic in the future. But I think when it comes to as a food, I am not worried. I'm on the camp that says, yes, I've seen enough literature, I am convinced that it's safe. But I'm not convinced that if the whole world goes GMO crop, that there may not be negative consequence. And I think people need to look into that before they do that. It's the same as the, what's that malaria vaccine, right, that they're putting out, okay? So they're doing this malaria vaccine, which Bill Gates and so on have funded in huge amount. Great stuff, right? But we all know that no vaccine, nothing is 100%, right? And so a theory of evolution is going to kick in, right? So those parasites in the mosquito that survive this dose, they are the most virulent strain, right? So now what do, right? It becomes the battle of the germ versus the medicine. So people need to think about that. They say, yeah, we can go vaccinate the whole population. It will save a few 100 million people, sure. But then there will be a few 100,000 where it won't work, and these guys, these organisms are the ones that are resistant. Now you have a resistant strain, all right? What do you do? Now you have the next level of it to fight that. And now, you know, in thinking ahead is where we need to plan these things, right? So.
All right. So I want to elaborate a little bit on what some of the others said, like Kevin and I think Mark said. They were talking about people who you can't convince. You know, they're flat earthers or they're moon conspiracy landing guys. So there's nothing rational. It's not, you know, we're sitting here going, you need to explain the science, you need to talk logically. But they're not interested in any of that. It's a lot of hot air to them. Logic doesn't work. Science doesn't work. My agenda is that there's a number of evolutionary psychologists who study the human mind. And they show, convincingly to me, that the human brain is not a logic engine. It's sad for us because we sit in here and we try our best to be logical and scientific, but people are not that way. And certainly I've seen in here that that happens as well. And you pointed it out yourself, that skeptics and atheists, regardless, can have their cognitive biases that feed these different categories you're talking about. So it's very hard because it's just, you know, you talk about evolution, that's how we evolved. We didn't evolve as a logic engine. We evolved with cognitive biases and heuristics, shortcuts to figure out how to survive. And so for hundreds of thousands of years, we did what it took to survive and reproduce. But it wasn't based on logic, and if superstitions were feeding people, feeding their heads all these years, well, it worked because we're here, right? All these people are here who believe this stuff. They still believe it. They believed it then. It's brutal because I don't like it. I don't like to see the fact that you have all these, well, I don't want to get too political here, but there's a political movement in this country that is making me crazy, right? Most of us in here would agree. And yet it shows that people do not think logically and rationally. They think emotionally, and that apparently is really the norm. It's what we do here is not the norm.
Yeah, so hopefully that you will be more of an activist, that you keep these people who are trying to promote these pseudoscience nonsense from being in power, right? School boards, you know, when the school board elections, you know, ask them, the candidates, straight out questions, right? If you have children in school, help out with the science classroom, help out with the teachers, and if they are going in the wrong direction, confront them or gently, you know, correct them. I think that's the only way we can. I mean, yeah, the general populace, they're going to go where they're going to go. But I was quite involved when my kids were in school. You know, I was with the science teacher. I mean, I donate a lot, whatever equipment they are, just to get a good side, and then so they can listen to me. So when I, show up at the classroom to help out, it means something to them. And when they, don't, they want to skip certain chapters in the biology, but no, keep going. It's good, right? So I think that would help, right? That we make sure that our government policies and so on are not skewed towards, the pseudoscience side, are not skewed against those of us who are not non-superstitious. And because it's so much easier to not have to think about it, right? That you grew up with particular prejudice and so on, just go along with it. And most people are not equipped or doesn't want to be interested in confronting their own prejudice or confronting the cognitive dissonance. It's tough. And so hopefully that if you're involved in local affairs, in school districts and in elections, confront them and make sure those people don't get into power. I don't know what to tell. Like I said, it's a brain dump here. I'm listening to everybody, and maybe take something from this, and hopefully be more of an activist. When a candidate comes along, to just ask them straight out questions, make people think about it. Thank you.